Department of Defense 60th anniversary of the Korean War Commission. And we had a great working relationship with him and his commission, as we were just discussing, and did a lot of oral history work and that kind of thing. It was a great experience, and I want to thank you for that, David, and please join me now in welcoming Colonel David Clark.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. This is a really unique chapter in the Korean War that we're going to talk about today, and it's hopefully will provide you some insights into an aspect of the Korean War that you may not have known about. It's a great story, and before I introduce these four heroes to my left, I want to provide a little bit of context. Next summer, on June 25th, it will mark the 65th anniversary since the start of the Korean War. It's hard to believe. I'm sure these guys probably scratch their heads and say, where have all the years gone? But we did the 60th anniversary of the Korean War only in 2010 and concluded in 2013, and here we are already on the brink of the 65th anniversary. So it provides kind of an opportunity for us to think about the Korean War and why it's important. When it was happening, it was not a particularly popular war. You think about the context of the Korean War. It began roughly 5 years after the end of World War II. America was war-weary from World War II. Many of the forces in the Department of Defense had been drawn down. In Japan, for instance, the units that ultimately deployed to Korea first were occupying units who were hollowed out in many ways, did not have a lot of training and equipment. So that's kind of what the scenario looked like on the eve of the Korean War in 1950. And what happened was, when the Korean War, even when the Korean War concluded, it was very difficult to understand what the significance of the war was. Well, which way would Korea go after this? Would Korea take this opportunity to rebuild itself and become a nation among nations around the world? Well, in fact, it did. It took a while. In the early stages, in the first decade or two after the Korean War, the future of Korea was somewhat uncertain. But very clearly, in the 30 years after the war, 40 years after the war, the Republic of Korea became a great nation, an incredible ally of the United States, and a great partner of the United States in Northeast Asia. But who could have seen that in 1950? It was very difficult. It's really hard to imagine now the United States making that kind of commitment almost anywhere. I mean, you think about the wars that we're in right now in Iraq and Afghanistan, and after 12, 13 years, it seems like an eternity. Try to imagine the commitment on the Korean Peninsula, 50, 60 years. But that's how long it took. So now what I want to do is tell you a little bit about the 65th Infantry Regiment, the Borinqueneers, and they're going to tell you the details. I just want to provide a little bit of context, and then I'll turn it over to them so that you can hear their story. But a lot of people think, okay, the 65th Infantry Regiment, they came from Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico was a U.S. territory. This must have been some kind of a reserve unit or a volunteer outfit. No, the 65th Infantry Regiment became a regular Army unit in 1908. That's how far back their history goes. They were active and on the rolls in World War I and World War II, although they were largely kept from combat in those wars because of the policies of the United States government at the time. This was all prior to Executive Order 9981 when President Truman desegregated the armed forces in 1948. So, how did the Army look at racial troops in those days? Well, they were largely segregated and they were kept away from major combat. And hopefully we'll get into that a little bit here. But the Borinqueneers, at the start of the Korean War, when I told you about those occupation forces in Japan, those units were not very well trained, not very well equipped, hollowed out in a lot of ways, but they were the closest to the conflict when the North Koreans invaded in June of 1950, and they had to respond quickly to try to stem the tide. So those units deployed. But shortly thereafter, the War Department was trying to figure out, okay, what units are going to go next? And as they looked across, the panoply of units that were available, the 65th, somebody suggested the 65th Infantry Regiment. Not only was it well trained, but there were many people in the cadre that had fought in World War II or had been on active duty in World War II. There were experienced officers and NCOs in that unit, and it was a regular Army unit. So it became part of the 3rd Infantry Division, and it was deployed to the Republic of Korea. The 65th's history is absolutely phenomenal. If you look at some of their honors, 9 major campaigns in Korea. They earned the Presidential Unit Citation, the Meritorious Unit Citation, 2 Republic of Korea unit citations. And then earlier this year, in an honor that was long overdue, they received the Congressional Gold Medal from President Obama. Individual awards from the 65th Infantry Regiment. There were 8 Distinguished Service Crosses, 163 Silver Stars, 421 Bronze Stars for this unit in the 3 years of combat in Korea. You notice there were no medals of honor. I think that's an oversight. These men may talk about that a little, but maybe they won't. But I look at the battle history of the 65th Infantry Regiment, and it seems to me that the racial situation that was going on at that time in the United States Army may have prevented that from happening, may have prevented honest consideration of those that may have deserved higher accolades. So now let me turn to a brief bio on each of these gentlemen that are sitting to my left, your right. First, let me start on my far left with Dr. Alberto J. Garcia. Dr. Alberto J. Garcia served with the Medical Company, 65th Infantry, 3rd Infantry Division, United States Army. On April 26, 1951, near Ilbisang-ni, Korea, a large enemy force completely surrounded a battalion command post, isolating it from other friendly units. Dr. Garcia worked among the wounded in the adjacent aid station in a calm manner and tended to the wounded while under enemy fire. He exposed himself to the enemy as he rendered aid to the wounded and acquitted himself with dauntless courage. And Dr. Garcia was awarded the Bronze Star Medal with V device for valor during that engagement. At the time, he was Captain Garcia, and he will be able to provide some interesting insight into the medical side of activity in Korea. So I'm very happy to have Dr. Garcia with us. Next, I would like to introduce Sergeant Major Victor Lopez Nieves. Sergeant Major Victor Lopez Nieves served in the Heavy Mortar Company of the 65th Infantry Regiment from April 1951 to April 1952. He also served 28 years in the United States Army, retiring at the rank of Sergeant Major. He served in both Korea and later in Vietnam, where he also received the Bronze Star and the Legion of Merit. Just a little bit about Sergeant Major Lopez Nieves. He arrived in Korea in April 1951 as a replacement and was assigned to Heavy Mortar Company, 65th Infantry Regiment, even though he was not trained for that. You'll see a lot of that. A lot of the soldiers were not properly trained, particularly later in the conflict, some of the replacements. He started out as a private, and by February 1952, he was a master sergeant. He was promoted almost monthly and in the last 4 to 5 months consecutively. So his story is fascinating. He retired after 20 years of honorable service, and we're honored to have him with us as well. So a round of applause. Next, I'd like to introduce Command Sergeant Major Emilio Castro Rivera. Command Sergeant Major Emilio Castro Rivera served in the Army from November 2nd, 1950 to September 26, 1956. At this point, he ended with the rank of Master Sergeant, transferred to the Air Force, and retired on October 1st, 1974 with the rank of Command Sergeant Major. Medals received: the Bronze Star for Valor, Purple Heart, Korean Service Medal, and 4 Bronze Stars, UN Service Medal, Combat Infantry Badge, and all of the unit awards that I mentioned earlier. He served for 6 years, as I said. He was wounded in combat on March 12, 1951 in Uijeonbu Valley, South Korea, and served also 28 years of honorable service in the United States military. And then finally, I would like to introduce First Sergeant Fernando Rodriguez Borges. Who enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1950. He was soon sent on a ship to Korea, where he would be part of H Company, 2nd Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, which was one of the other regiments, one of the other 3 regiments in the 3rd Infantry Division. From there, he would join the 65th Infantry Division, the Borinqueneers. After a stint in Korea, he was sent back to the States, where in 1954, he found himself back in the 3rd ID, again at Fort Benning. He came back to Korea, and he also served in Vietnam, where he deployed with the 1st Air Cav Division and the 101st Air Cav, retiring from active duty in 1972 with the rank of First Sergeant. He still serves God and country to the best of his ability. How about a warm round of applause for First Sergeant Rodriguez Borges. So what I would like to do is I'll start with an opening question, and I'll let these gentlemen talk, and then we'll offer an opportunity to the audience to ask them some questions as well. So I guess what I would like to start out with is, when the Korean War began in 1950, you were young men. Some would say boys. Young men, though. What kind of an impression did Korea make on you when you first arrived? I assume most of you had never left the island of Puerto Rico at that point in your life. So I can imagine it must have been quite an odd experience for you. So I would like to get some of your reflections about your impressions of Korea when you first arrived. First Sergeant, if...
Willard, is he on?
He's on the mic.
Yeah. We knew exactly what was going to happen. We knew that we were replacements to the 65th Infantry Regiment, because we also knew what the history tells us, that the 65th was practically decimated during the push from South Korea to the Yalu River. They were really low in personnel. The United States, they needed to have replacement for these regiments and for these units. And in Puerto Rico, they started calling us in September of 1950. That was about 2 months after the Korean War had started. So it took them a long time to prepare, our troops, including my two buddies to the left. After 10 weeks of basic training, we boarded the Navy boats to transport us to Korea. That's a 35-day trip from Puerto Rico, or I would say from San Juan to Busan. The minute we arrived in Korea, they put us in a Korean train, standing up like cattle, like you put cattle in there. They transport us from Busan to Seoul. At that time, we were met by the commanding general of the 3rd Infantry Division. And our impression was, that what we had in Korea were pushing the North Korean above the parallels of the Seoul, the capital.
38 bottom.
And my group was large. There was almost 2,000 Puerto Ricans going out there. So since there were so many of them, some of us ended being transferred to the 15th and the 7th Infantry Regiment. The others were directly to the 65th Infantry. I was one of the few that were assigned to the 15th Infantry Regiment. In those days, you had to prove yourself to the men that were there because we were Puerto Ricans, we were strangers. And we were not welcome. We were not welcome because the great majority of us didn't speak English. And it was just like a novelty for the Americans, and we had to prove ourselves. So I was challenged to prove myself in front of the company commander and in front of the platoon sergeants out there. So my first fight in Korea was with another soldier of the United States. And he was a sergeant, the platoon sergeant. And I took him on. I took Tough Sergeant. He was a first sergeant from Tennessee. That was my first fight. But they didn't like it because I won it. They said, well, if you beat my sergeant, now you got to beat me on my other sergeant. So here comes another sergeant. He puts on the gloves, and I beat him up too. There was another one. Here's a private now. This private gets in there, and he calls. He challenged me. I already got 2 fights. And he challenges me. He says, this guy is beaten. No, I wasn't. That third guy didn't last 2 minutes with me on the ring. I put him down. Now comes the other story of my story. A black soldier challenges me. And I said, soldier, you don't challenge me. You are in the same spot I am. No, but you beat my sergeant. And I had to do something for that. I said, well, go ahead, put on the gloves and I'll show you. And that little guy, he suffered because I put him on the ground quick. All right, now I got 3 white, 1 black, and now they say, you gotta fight another one. So they look around in the company and they found the biggest guy that there was in there. And this guy is a black soldier. And I said, so, you don't need to do this to me. He says, I know. And I said, you're gonna swing at me, and I'm gonna take a dive. And he said, yes. So we got in the ring, he swung at me, he missed me, and I took a dive, and I stayed down there for 5 minutes. I needed a break. I proved my point to my people that I was there to fight. I wasn't there just to play around. I was there to fight in a team. I don't care who was to my right or who was to my left. I am there to fight as a team against the enemy that was in front of us.
First
The
Sergeant,
following day,
We wouldn't mess with you now. We wouldn't mess with you now.
The following day, my companies move out to the front. There are these thousands of North Vietnamese, North Korean, excuse me when I say North Vietnamese because I also fought them. The North Koreans were coming in a counterattack, and I can see them coming. And my company moves out, and to our flank, we have a guard to our flank, on the right flank, and another on the left. The guy that was on the right side, on the right flank, got shot by a Korean sniper. The company is down, and nobody is moving. So since I was there, I asked, what happened? And they told me, one of our men has been hit, but nobody's moving. I said, but something had to be done. I picked up my rifle, and I started moving up the hill in the direction of where I thought the guy was down. Everybody calling me idiot, stupid, you don't do that, you don't do this. And I said, you can call me whatever you want, but I'm going to get this guy out. And I kept on crawling up that hill. I got the guy, I got his rifle, and I got my rifle, and both of us, we rolled down the hill until we got to the medic, who take him, probably saved his life. I don't know what the result was. That was my second fight, or my second action in Korea. Like I said, I was in the 15th Infantry Regiment. I was not yet in the 65th. A week later, my company is moving again, and we receive a direct shot from artillery, from the North Korean artillery. The artillery round hit the front of the vehicle, blew it up in the air, and I was in the back of the vehicle, and I also flew up in the air. When I landed with the butt of my rifle between my legs, and I broke my left ankle. And the story from there on is, you got a broken ankle, we had to get you out, and they took me out all the way to a hospital in Japan. And I was in Japan for 6 months recuperating. They repaired my ankle, I recuperated. I was only 20 years old, and I recuperated very quick. No sooner I recuperated, I was sent back to Korea. On the way to Korea, I met my brother, Fernando, another Fernando, who is on the way to Korea. So I knew somebody going back with me. At this time, I report back to my company, Company D, Company H of the 15th Infantry Regiment. And they asked me, who are you? And I said, I'm a member of this company. And they said, well, what's your name? I said, Fernando Rodriguez, Weapons Platoon. And the man said, you don't belong to us. And I said, what? This is my company. He said, you don't belong to us. You get back on that jeep and report to the 65th Infantry Regiment. You have been transferred. Where are my orders? No, you don't have any orders. You report to them. And I said, but where are my orders? They don't expect me. And he said, you get on that jeep and report to that fucking 65th Infantry Regiment. I didn't like that. So I did pick up my bag, and I moved, and I went to the regimental headquarters, and I met Colonel Cordero, who was the regimental commander at the time. I said, sir, I've been transferred from the 15th. I said, I know that. So what are you going to do with me? He said, I'm going to send you to the 1st Battalion. And I said, well, I go to the 1st Battalion commander, and the 1st Battalion commander said, go to D Company. I go to D Company, and they send me to the field. You're going to be with the weapons platoon. And I tell you, it was December of 1951. The snow has already been on the ground. And under a couple of feet of snow, and we were in fatigues, and we were in combat boots, and it was cold like hell. It was very cold. So I figured that the third enemy that we encountered, and that was the weather. It was tough. It was brutal. The weather was so bad that I don't know how we Puerto Ricans survive there. Because we come from a nice, warm country. The only difference between Puerto Rico and Korea is that Korea is bigger than we are, but we got mountains and we know how to travel on the mountains. We know how to travel that kind of terrain. That's what they call us the mountaineers, the Borinqueneers, the people from Borinquen. Those guys, they know how to they know how to fight in the open. And we did very well. I was assigned to that company D, and the people that we have were our people, and we can communicate very easily in both languages. My greatest difficulty was that when I was transferred from the 15th Infantry Regiment to the 65th, my biggest difficulty was that my records disappeared. So I consider myself like I am a ghost soldier serving in the United States Army, and there's no records. I got a couple of promotions. My buddy to the left, he got about 5 promotions in less than a year. I got 2 promotions, but the promotions never showed up. I had no records. Finally, I had to start my own mission to find my records. And after 3 days on the road, I found my records, and I could, again, resume my career until I was rotated back to Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you, First Sergeant. Dr. Garcia, if you would comment on your first impressions coming from Puerto Rico to Pusan.
Well, I had finished my training, my internship, but I was in the reserve, and I was working in a hospital in Puerto Rico in 1950 when the Korean War started on June 25th, which happened to be our wedding anniversary. So I never expected to be called that quick, but by early August, I was called to report. I was working in a hospital in Puerto Rico in Aguadilla. I reported to Fort Buchanan. The general in charge of the 65th was Colonel Harris. He was a very nice gentleman. And within a week or 10 days, I was in a ship called the McAllister Victory that carried transportation. We went from Puerto Rico through the Panama Canal, through the Pacific. We hit a typhoon just south of Tokyo, landed in Sasebo, Japan, to refuel, and then from there we went to Busan. So we landed in Busan in early September. By that time, the Korean War was limited to what they call the Busan perimeter, and they were in very bad shape. And luckily, I got there just a few days after MacArthur invaded the Incheon landing. This completely destroyed the North Korean army. So when we landed in Busan, we were able to move rapidly north, following the Korean army. North Korean army was destroyed. And we went all the way up with the 65th, past the Korean triangle, all the way to Daejeon, which is south of Seoul. From there, MacArthur decided to invade North Korea. So we went back to Busan, and when Busan, the 65th was transferred by ship all the way to North Korea. There are 2 big cities on the east coast of Korea, Wonsan and Hamhung. So we landed in Wonsan, 65th. We're very lucky because the bay was very heavily mined, but the 1st Korean Rock Army had already gone north and captured Wonsan, and they cleaned the mines. So the 65th was able to land in Wonsan. I went with an advance party by Piper Cup in a plane, so I didn't have to go with the rest of the troops. So I was already in Wonsan with the 2 officers. And it looked like the Korean War was over. We were in North Korea, in Wonsan, which is south of the other big city on the east side called Hamhung. Army provisions were in a big storage houses in Wonsan. By that time, MacArthur made the decision we were going to go home for Christmas. So somebody made a decision we would not issue winter issue to the troops because we're going back home. So that was a mistake because by Thanksgiving, was November 28th, I remember because it was my birthday too. So November 28th, while we were having the turkey and the pumpkin pies, the Chinese decided to cross across the Yalu River, which they did. And they quickly destroyed almost the 7th Division. And already you know all about the 1st Marine Division and the Chosan Reservoir, which were surrounded. Luckily, the 3rd Army, which was the 3rd Division, which I was a member with the 65th and the 15th and the 10th and the 7th Regiment, we were well stationed. So the remnants of the 7th Division and eventually the remnants of the 1st Marine Division came through our front. I took care of many of the 1st Marine wounded. They were in very bad shape with very bad cold lesions, you know. So I saw some sergeants with big blades hanging from their nose and their ears, about 5 inches long, full of fluid. Very bad frostbites. Because MacArthur said we're going to go home for Christmas, somebody make a decision. All the supplies for the Army were in Wonsan, and somebody decided, well, we're going to go home. We don't have to issue the supplies for the winter. So what happened was, when the Chinese invaded across the Yalu River into North Korea, the North Korean Army was never really devastated. They were in the hills. Korea, as you mentioned, is very hilly. So when the Chinese invaded across the Yalu, the North Korean Army came from the hills and they captured Wonsan. We were stationed in Wonsan, so we had to move up to Hamhung and abandon Wonsan. And because we were not issued the winter issue, it was one of the biggest problems as a doctor I had, because most of the soldiers didn't have caps, they didn't have pile jackets, they didn't have extra socks. It was a mistake somebody made. I don't know who made it in the Upper Charleston, but anyhow, most of the soldiers had just a little pile jacket. Some of them didn't have winter hats. They were lucky to have a pair of socks. Somebody decided in the United States to issue some nice boots for the Korean War. These were wonderful boots, very warm. The only trouble is that when you sweat it and you settle down for the night, this sweat became ice. So we had a lot of frostbites. So I spent my life as a doctor treating frostbites on these soldiers. I used to, in my first aid station, I used to hand their socks, which was quite an experience because I smelled pretty bad. So, but most of the soldiers had just one pair of socks. Some of them had just a pile jacket. Some of them had light hats. So we had a lot of winter problems. And as you said, in the Korean War, because it was a UN affair, we used centigrade instead of Fahrenheit. Now, in centigrade, 0 is freezing, means water becomes ice. In North Korea, the temperature was not 10 below 0, it was 40 below 0. I've been from Puerto Rico, that's quite a change, to go to 40 below 0, believe me. That was very, very, very cold. It was almost impossible to keep warm. So finally, I treated a lot of the Marines, as I said, they came to my aid stations. And that was on Thanksgiving 28. So the Marines were evacuated through Hamhung, and we sort of leapfrogged back into Hongnam, and finally left North Korea on December 24th. I remember standing on the pier, looking up on the hills, and you could see the Chinese on horses in the hills. We were lucky they decided to let us go, because I think they could have taken us right there where we were. But we finally were evacuated on December 24th, so that the newspapers could say we're home for Christmas, which means we went all the way down to Busan. The rest of the time we spent in South Korea. The war settled to be in the 38th parallel. finally, on April 22nd, the Chinese decided to throw the UN troops out of Korea. And that was their biggest offensive of April 22nd. April 22nd is a very significant day for communism because it's Lenin's birthday. It's amazing that the intelligence of the U.S. didn't figure that out. But on April 22nd at midnight, the Chinese started their last offensive to throw us out into the sea. They were successful in throwing us back about 10 miles, but there were so many casualties that the Chinese suffered that they never try an offensive like that again, and they settled for the 38th parallel. It was, our outfit, the 65th, was surrounded very quickly. They always attack at nighttime because they didn't have Air Force. So all the battles that I was in Korea mostly were started at 12 midnight. So it started at 12 midnight. They surrounded us very quickly. And the only reason they did destroy us because what they call the walking artillery. I don't know if you probably know what walking artillery, but the artillery fire just, we were here, they threw artillery all the way around, and they kept up that night, throwing artillery around us. And I guess that's the only reason that we were not captured by the Chinese. In the morning, at 5 o'clock in the morning, as the sun came out, you could see the Chinese running up the hills, and the Sabre jets coming in and dropping the napalm bomb. Of course, we were going, hooray! But I don't think the Chinese appreciated that because they were getting burned by the napalm bomb. I stayed in Korea for another, that was on April 22nd. I stayed in Korea for another few months until August. And in August, I was transferred back to Japan and back to the United States. And by the way, I was in Japan in I when, when MacArthur was deposed, and I happened to get a chance to see General MacArthur as he's coming off the Ichi building, which was way across from the Emperor Palace. But that was my experience in Korea. And I think the biggest enemy in Korea was, as the sergeant said, it was the cold weather. 40 below zero is, in fact, for instance, the service company, they had to start their vehicles every half an hour during the night and let them run for at least 10 or 15 minutes. Otherwise, they wouldn't be any good in the morning. The canteens, we have to leave at least 1 or 2 inches off because in the mornings, our canteens were frozen ice, the water. And we had to build the bonfire and put them over the fire to melt them so we could drink the water. One of the most interesting cases I saw there, as a rule, I was in the 2nd Battalion of the 65th. In the average battle, we had about 3 to 5 dead and about 10 to 15 wounded. There was a sergeant who used to come into my aid station all the time, and he was very religious. He had a big Bible on his vest pocket. In one of the battles, he came into my aid station, and his Bible was hit by a piece of shrapnel. The Bible was split in 2 pieces, and he had a scratch on his chest. If he had the Bible, I think he would have been a dead hombre. But he was very lucky. His religion paid off. Another had a sergeant who came into my aid station, almost screaming in joy. He took off his helmet, and he had a hole in his helmet here, and he had a hole in his helmet here. I think what happened, I figured out, maybe a bullet entered at an angle, went around the helmet between the liner, and came onto the other side. So he was a very happy soldier, having a helmet with 2 holes on his side. He had a little scratch on his side. But that was my experience in Korea. I was very glad to get out of there.
Just, yes, and thanks, Dr. Garcia. I appreciate that. And Sergeant Major Nieves, if you could, we are getting a little bit short on time. If you could give us an encapsulation of your time as well.
Could you repeat the question? I lost track of the question. Listening to the people here.
Yes, well, just your first impressions and your impressions in general coming from small Puerto Rico and arriving as a young man in a very different environment.
Well, my first impression is different from them. I come from the hinterlands in Puerto Rico, from the mountains. So I'm a draftee, so I wasn't looking for coming into the service, but they drafted me anyway. And like he indicated, we went through 12 weeks of basic training and put on the ship, and out you go. Now, the Puerto Ricans, even though it's a small island, it's surrounded by water all over. Any place you go, you're going to end up in the ocean. The Puerto Rican is not a lover of the ocean at that time. So I've never been out in the ocean. I've never been in a boat. And all of a sudden, I'm on a boat, loaded with a duffel bag, an M1, headed for Korea. I almost died during the trip. Never heard about Korea. I don't know what Korea was, but I was going there. So 35 days later, I'm in Japan. I'm so sick because I threw up probably 30 days out of the 35. And my weight was about 100 pounds. I was in bad shape. I couldn't carry my weapon. I couldn't carry my bags. So they put me in the hospital for a week, and they sort of resurrected me, put me on a boat, and ended up in Korea a day later, about midnight. And they told us, hey, you stay there, don't undress, just take your boots off. Something is bound to happen. Sure enough, at 3 o'clock in the morning, they threw us out. Get your boots on, you're going up front. The Chinese has broken through the line, so they needed people to plug the line, and I was one of them, a rifleman. So 3 o'clock in the morning, I got to the 4th of July, and there were bullets flying all over the place. I don't know what's going on. So somebody comes around and says, come over here. You stay here. There's a trench here. There is a foxhole. You stay there. If something moves around there, you shoot at it. It is raining. It is monsoon. When we talk about monsoon, about Korea, those of you who have been in Korea, is that today is a beautiful day. But tomorrow, monsoon comes in, and it rains for 5, 6, 7 days, a week in a row. So it was monsoon time. So there was a firefight in there. I participated, and I got my combat infantry badge the first day that I got there. And that's my experience.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. Sergeant Major Rivera, if you could also give us a quick synopsis of your time.
My time, well, it was a surprise. I was recruited right out of college after I finished my degree in business administration, and they sent me to Camp Tortuguero for 2 rough weeks. From there, we went ahead and left for Buchanan in the northern part of Puerto Rico, which is close to, they were shipping all the military. And they put us on a big boat, and then we left there, if I remember, 2:30 in the afternoon. There was 3,500 of us. They put on that big ship, and I had never been in a ship, there. When that ship starts moving like that in the Atlantic, I'm telling you, I was sick right away. And finally, through all that trouble, we went to the Panama Canal Zone. From there, we went straight to Japan. And then luckily, before we get to Hawaii, we had one of those big, enormous typhoons. And that was another rough for Emilio, being sick, all that throwing, Well, finally, we landed in Japan. From there, we took training in a small camp called Omiya in the southern part of Japan. From there, we went to Sasebo, which Sasebo was a big base also, or the gateway to Korea. Again, they put some of those landing boat there. and we wound up and took a ship. We were waiting in the middle of the ocean, and we climbed those ladders there, all that heavy equipment. And after that, well, we landed in Busan. In Busan, like he said earlier, we all landed in there, and then we're dividing up by groups and put in a very dirty and filthy train, was dusty, like you name it. And we finally made it to the front. When we get to the front, with the 65th, we're fighting in the area of Chowon, which was the Chowon, the Pyongyang, and Humhan on the corner. And from there, we all got divided, and they told me, Emilio, you're gonna get some of you, guys. If they don't want it, you volunteer them. He said, who gonna volunteer? We know what to do. But I say, you, and you, at the team with me, follow me. We all got equipment, and we went to the front. We went to the front there. I asked a guy there, the Puerto Rican, who was waiting for us, and I said, where's the front? He says, right here. You just got in. He said, oh, my God. And then all the mortar, all the stuff was coming down like rain, And we had to, dug in and. And from there, well, they decided, Emilio, your squad is going to be one of skirmishes, and you're going to be looking for the enemy, and you're going to be transmitting to the airplane on top, where the Chinese are at. That's exactly what we did. We're looking at big bicycles, about that big, and looking for the Chinese. Well, we didn't see any. And then we saw a whole bunch of them coming like ants, And then we decided where we retreat to our perimeter. And from there we asked for, airplanes. The airplanes started, hitting them like, and they would jump, And then was throwing those napalm bombs, And they were burning them like, you name it, And we were shooting them with machine guns, and we killed a whole bunch of them, I'm telling you. And from there, after my time in, and 2 weeks being in Korea, they made me a corporal. And then after that, about 3 more months, I was a sergeant, And I said, wow, this thing is good to me. But, I had to wait what's going to be, And then when we fought in the Valley of Ijombu, that's where I got hurt the first time. Over there, they sent me to Japan. I stayed there 30 days. And then when I got back, I
Sorry,
said...
Major, we're running short on time, so sorry to interrupt you, but if you could, thank you.
Okay.
No,
That's
please.
enough? Oh, I'm sorry. And then from there, naturally, I wound up back to Japan again when they told me I had 46 points that they were giving to GI that have been in the service, the front for so a certain time, and from there, well, they shipped me back to the U.S., And then come back to New York, where I was living at the time, and from there, I was living, I worked with RCA, in communication, and from there I got out of civilian life, and I came into the Air Force.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I just want to thank each of our panelists for their recollections about the Korean War and their specific and interesting stories and their perspective. It was very enlightening today, and I want to thank you very much. Please keep in mind, I encourage you to read more about the Korean War. It's a fascinating period of history, and it's not often talked about. So hopefully this will have sparked some interest, and you'll continue in the future, learning more about the war itself. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, there are several books, and if you Google, several will come up. But I do want to talk to you about a documentary you have to see. It's called The Borinqueneers. I highly recommend it. Our producer and director is here, and she can talk to you about it after. But it's a great feature. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank